فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها صدق الله العلي العظيم أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. When we look at the Quran and we look at the purpose of religion, and especially the message of the Prophet, we see that at its very core, beyond the rituals, beyond the ziyarat, beyond the prayers and the litanies and the eulogies, there is a core or a jawhar to the religion. There is an essence which is undeniable, and there is a motive therein which is ubiquitous to every religion and to every individual. Now, what is that? And when we read the Quran, and if we to read it with a sense of neutrality, impartiality, without projecting meaning onto the Quran based upon our whim or based upon our lower desires, based upon the caprice of our soul, or based upon the conditioning of our society, based on our tribal, national, ethnic, linguistic affinities. Beyond all of these, if we were to read the Quran, and of course in its most raw and nascent form, the Quran is a very, very clear message. As the Quran says, ذِكْرَى لِمَنْ لَهُ قَلْبٌ. It is a reminder, it is a remembrance. It is something to meditate upon for whom has a heart. And this is the crux of the matter, the verse which I recited, which says that the soul, by the soul, we swear by the soul, and how we have fashioned it. The قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ, and we have inspired it with good and bad. Now the soul which purifies itself is the one which is successful, and the soul which destroys it or buries itself, as the literal word means, is the one which is unsuccessful. So if we were to pierce through all the layers of external meaning, or we were to pierce through all the veils we have wrought and bought upon the Holy Scripture and the message, the pristine message of the Prophet, we would come to the core, and we would come to its charisma, as they say. It's said that as Ronald Bultmann says, that the myth is not the charisma. The charisma meaning the very center, the very core, the very meaning, the very reality that is external and actually there in concrete. And that is the akhlaq and the morality of the Quran. Continuously the Quran exhorts you to remember, to do tafakkur and tadhakkur. But prior to tafakkur, i.e. reflection, discursive reflection, to use your mind, to ratiocinate, it says to purify yourself, to be purified. And to purify yourself how? By the remembrance of God, by connecting with that reality, by shunning the skin and veils of otherness, by removing yourself from the lower pangs of your lower soul. Now, when one is afflicted by a dependency upon a substance of misuse, like a drug, like heroin, or whatever nowadays people, or even people who are to any substance of misuse, any sort of drug, an opiate, heroin, cocaine, whatever, you see that person is totally oblivious to everything. It is almost as the Quran says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you not seen that individual who has taken his idol, his Lord, his deity as his lower self, his caprice, his whim, his desire for pleasure, his hedonistic aspect? That, have you not seen that person? And that says, وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ. And God, upon knowledge of that, has misguided him. وَخَتَمَ عَلَىٰ سَمْعِهِ وَقَلْبِهِ. And has put a seal upon his ears, his hearing, and upon his heart. وَجَعَلَ عَلَىٰ بَصَرِهِ غِشَاوَةً. and has put a veil, cast a veil upon his eyes, upon his sight. فَمَنْ يَهْدِيهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ اللَّهِ أَفَلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. And who will guide him other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is what Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, that what is it that a man has? He has nothing when he does not have God. And if he has God, he has everything. That beyond God, if you were to seek any guidance, you will be in manifest error. If you were to seek anything anywhere beyond that, there is utter misguidance, utter helplessness. As the Quran says, that it is like somebody who has been fallen into the wind and been plucked by a bird. So, as I was saying, somebody who is on a substance of misuse and is so dependent, it is as this verse says, that his eyes have a veil, his heart is sealed, his ears cannot hear. It is only the caprice of that drug he wants. As soon as he gets the high from the drug, he feels high, he feels good, he has that hedonistic pleasure, the dopamine is released in his brain. But then he loses that slight dependency. He gets withdrawal symptoms. He starts feeling the cold turkey, the shivers, the cold, the sweats. Now similarly, the person who is high on his lower nafs, the person أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ, whoever has taken his lower self as his God and has made it his deity, as his drug of choice, as his go-to, as his prop in life, will find that there are highs. There is great hedonism, there is great pleasure, there is great joy, but it is fleeting, it is transitory, it is ephemeral. But when he drops and stoops from that pedestal of hedonism, of frolicking in the joys of the lower self, he will fall and find it a very lonely place, a very distressing place, a very anxious place, a place where he has no control over himself. He will do anything and everything to find that again. And that is the condition of a person who has given themselves to their lower self. Somebody who has let that wolf within them be fed so much that it has overtaken them. Somebody whose rational faculty has been, whose reins have been let go long ago and the horse has bolted. And therefore, closing the barn door sometimes is very much out of the question for some. But for us, let us try and gain the reins of that steed and come back to that pedestal of God-centricity and connection with the transcendent. And that is the goal of purification. And indeed, all the good counsel and admonition and sermonizing and pontificating upon the pulpit and reading religious lectures and filling your ears with nasheeds and all sorts of things which make you feel good do not necessarily constitute a change in your moral and spiritual constitution. It is only when you start to change that fabric of your inner being, and if you start to alter the landscape which is within you, that you will start to receive the superfluity and the abundance of goodness from the revelation. Whatever revelation, of course, because we believe that akhlaq, morality, spirituality is a hierarchical scheme. It is modulated at every level and accordingly to every person of their sort of where they find themselves and to what exposure they have to truths and truth systems, they will have morality within them. It is not only the preserve of one who say he has followed the dictates of the revelation that was brought to our dear Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rather, this is a human capital, and everyone has to gain from it to whatever potential. But of course, when we say that raw religion in its raw sense has a ubiquity, has a transcendent unity, and has a truth to all religions, but it is how that truth manifests itself within the acute structures of society. We cannot be in mountains being yogis. We cannot do certain things which are completely antithetical. And that is why the Quran says, وَلَا تَنْسَى نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Live in the world, yet live in the other world. Be connected to the world, enjoy its fruits and bounties, but yet be very much aware of the life to come. And as the Quran says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ الْمُلْكُ وَهُوَ على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. What is the Quran saying here? It says that He has indeed created death and life so that you test which of you has the better of morals and character. But look at the beauty of this verse. It says that God has created the akhirah or maut first, and then He has created life. The verse is not saying life and death as we say in English. It is saying that glorified is that Lord that has created death and then life. So it goes to show that the real propriety and efficacy of life is death. Death and connection to death. Like Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, a very, very spiritually uplifting statement beyond what you would find amongst ordinary men. It says, كَأَنَّ الدُّنْيَا لَمْ تَكُنْ وَكَأَنَّ الْآخِرَةَ لَمْ تَزَلْ. That it is as though, and this is Hussein not teaching himself, this is the very Hussein who says that these people, by cause of killing me, this is the morals of the Prophet, that by cause of killing me, they are entering hell. And entering hell is of course none but that anxiety and state of guilt they will incur along with the physical manifestation of that hell. So Hussein says in this statement that it is as though the world was never there, and it is as though the akhirah has never gone. It is as being in the world at the same time, but you are still in the akhirah. And when Hussein alayhi salam says this, and teaching those people that were killing him, he is saying it on that moral edifice that the Prophet himself laid and said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ بِمَكَارِمِ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Like we said, morals are on a hierarchical scale. There is morality at every level of that hierarchy, whether you may have it amongst religious people or non-religious people. And as we can say, that non-religious people still maintain that degree of morality because the efficacy of the message or whatever message, be it religious or non-religious, you receive is based on the refinement and spiritual constitution or moral constitution of your inner self. It is dependent upon that recipient, on what level they are, that they are able to bring about the best of that message and see the best in it. And this is where the Quran comes in and describes the prophets and the grand messengers. How does the Quran describe them? Of course, like it says about Yusuf, whose beauty was renowned, and describes the events, but it calls him Ayyuha Siddiq, the truthful one. It speaks about the Prophet, and it says, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Now, it does not say, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ دِينٍ عَظِيمٍ. It says, O Prophet, you are on the best of religion. But rather it says, O Prophet, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are on the best of morals. And this is where we learn where the Prophet, if we connect that to the idea of makarimul akhlaq, that the Prophet said he was sent with, we realize that the tradition or the religion and the revelation and the message of the Prophet is to bring what was already there amongst human beings and will always be there, because their source is one and their end is one. You cannot detach yourself from your source, which is God, the transcendent, the reality, the source of all beauty and good, and the end, which is nothing but, again, a beatific vision of God, be it either in hell or heaven. So the reality here is that the Prophet is bringing or realizing something that was already there on a greater pedestal of the hierarchy of morals. Makarimul akhlaq means this, that the Prophet came to refine them, to tune them, to reorient them, and bring about that great worthiness that the human being should occupy. Of course, there's ideas that the human may not be so great and the human beyond, but we are humans and we are very much unique in the world. I mean, if you look at our closest cousins, so to speak, in the evolutionary terms, the chimpanzees, they don't, or any of the primates, where are humans compared to them? So that in terms of the human being, there may be others beyond human, but we must be aware of just simply in the world and acutely aware of the goings on within the world. And that is how we think about in our morals and ethics. And coming to the end of the first khutbah, this is where we need to understand the ethics of disagreement. As Imam al-Sadiq had said, that لا تسقط من هو دونك فيسقطك من هو فوقك, that do not devalue, demean, deride anyone who's below you, i.e. in terms of any sort of religious or moral or economic or societal standing, because there will always be somebody above you who will do the same to you. And Imam al-Sadiq then continues in this tradition to speak about almost 99 or more ranks. So we need to realize in this sense that disagreement occurs at different hierarchies. And we must come to agree to disagree, whether it's a historical event. And of course, everyone, when they encounter, when things become politicized or any ideology takes on a identity, then naturally, this is very natural, it's not something necessarily we should censor to the utmost degree, but it occurs through the evolution of religion, that schisms occur and people then become entrenched in those schisms, and persecution and other things in their history then make them insular and see the other in a very, very different way. But of course, as times change, as freedom occurs, as you lose some of all those, the earlier historical, political sort of environment changes, then your vision of your history should change also. Not necessarily whitewash it or cast it away, but to say, hang on, that was a historical event under a certain political, social climate, and we will now look at it as that. And if we had certain ideas of how we looked at the other, or how we spoke about them, or how we performed our religious ceremonies and the language we used therein, that could be looked at again. Because in reality, our role models as believers in the family of the Prophet and the school of the Imams is the Imams themselves, and how they interacted with their adversaries. We find not a single word in their moral constitution that would be befitting to them that involved any use of bad, abusive language, any sort of sense of vulgarity. And in fact, this is, the Quran speaks about the Prophet, لَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظُ الْقَلْبِ لَانفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ, that if you were of vulgarness, if you are of a coarse nature, if you used bad language, people would flee from you. They would not remain near you. So it is very important that we reflect upon this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله ومن والاهم بالإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. On the topic of morals and ethics, which of course is the crux of our religious teachings and our everyday striving, we must remember that in order to embody that vision and in order to see it played out in reality, we on our individual level, of course, must always uphold that humanitarian, spiritual, ethical vision within our families, within our societies, and within our household. But you take that to another level, as I mentioned, that whoever purifies his soul is successful, as the Quran says in Surah Al-Shams, Surah Al-Duha. And in that regard, it is really important that when somebody achieves a position in society, like somebody becomes the head of a family, that purification of their soul becomes even more important. But when that person becomes the head of a society or a head of a state, and when, as we see when Imam Ali alayhi salam wrote to Malik al-Ashtar in that famous letter, which is a charter for good governance, he mentioned that first off, fear God. Imam Hassan alayhi salam was asked, what is siyasa, what is politics? And he said that first off, it is fear of God and purification of the soul. Because that is the very first aspect, that when there is a fear of a higher power, of a higher authority, and the chastisement that you may get by breaking the code of ethics, it will inevitably cause that person to act in a different way within society. One of the biggest issues within most leaders in the world is their lack of spiritual refinement and the lack of morality and the lack of fear of God even. And that is the very first thing that Imam Ali alayhi salam said to Malik al-Ashtar in that letter. Uthman bin Hunayf goes to a grand banquet in Kufa when he was governor under the Imam, and the Imam rebukes him for it. Furthermore though, if we look at the Imam himself at the time of his caliphate, a Jew comes with a case against the Imam regarding a shield, or the Imam actually then protests, and it goes to the Qadi, goes to the judge, and the Imam says, the Imam is firstly, of course, you are the Caliph of the time, he is greeted by the Caliph in a respectful tone and whatnot, but then he is asked to bring proof for the shield. But the Imam could not bring any proof. Of course, we're looking at it beyond a devotional way here, we're looking at this event, and then the Imam, he coalesced and he says, you can have, he convalesced and he said to him, you can have the shield. But that Jew knew this was not his shield. Because the Imam could not produce the witness, the Jew, after the court had ended and terminated and the case was decided, the Jew, because he still had that little bit of that humanity, that his moral compass was all right, he approached the Imam and he says, indeed, this is how a leader should be, and this is the leadership of prophets. This is truly how prophets would lead people on the basis of truth and justice. The man handed the shield back and then became a worthy follower of the Imam. So the reality of governance, and which is a necessary part, I mean, people may be apolitical, very true, but the Prophet had a political side to him. You cannot deny that. We won't cast his whole message and mission as a political one. Or we may say it's just an accident of what he had to do. But there was a political side to him. Similarly, the Imam had a political vision. And similarly, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, of course, the spiritual and the ethical vision is there, but there is also a political. And politics does not necessarily mean taking the reins of power. Islam does not promote in terms of its ideology, in terms of its essence, as we have mentioned, is morals and ethics. It does not say that go and seize power for the power's sake. It does not say kill people for killing's sake. It does not say, certain rules and regulations for the sake of them. Rather, they are means towards something. They are means for embedding a vision, a vision of truth and justice and ethics and morals. And similarly, that when we look around the world, we talk about the justice in people and rulers. And of course, you do not need to idolize anybody. I mean, if I was to speak about the late Imam Khomeini, I do not necessarily need to idolize him and say that he's my idol and make an infallible imam of the great individual. But you could see in a man, in an age now, we have, with creeping secularism, the first thing is to break certainty. Yaqeen. There is no yaqeen. It is all probable opinions and doubts, and all subject to subjectivity. The subjectivization and the creation of doubt and all these things is creeping secularization. But secularization is not necessarily bad. Of course, it has so many nuances and so many forms and transmutations and so much complexity that you cannot just brand it as a bad thing, because it is very much the vogue sort of political ideology of today. But if you look at Khomeini, you look at this grand person who is so absorbed, and of course we know he is a jurist par excellence, a philosopher, a mystic and everything, but you could see at the same time his statesmanship and ability to change people. People do not flock around a man who is full of doubts. A man who is thoroughly doubting himself or creating subjectivity. People flock to people who have yaqeen, who have certainty. As Iqbal says, यकीन मुहकम सही पे हम मोहब्बत फाते आलम जिहाद जिंदगानी में यही है मर्दों की शमशीरें. That a unshakable, immovable yaqeen and certainty, a continuous, incessant striving, and a love that conquers all is nothing but the sword of men who are fighting the war of life, the jihad of life. Now, you see these people have, even if you see not everyone's cup of tea, somebody like Imran Khan, a man who has yaqeen in what he is doing, and he has done it in various stages of life, inspirational. Things which occur, we could go back 1,000 years to the Imams, and of course they are par excellence. But even if you want to see it in this day and age, there are men who, and women even, who have done this. Of course, if we look at history, those examples we want to see lived in every age. We do not want to see them die or see them only on the pulpit for somebody to be, or in a tune that we hear. We want to see them lived. We want to find those rijal. As they say, there is kahtul rijal sometimes, a dearth of those. As Iqbal says, Meri tamam sar guzasht, khoye huon ki justaju. I am pining for those great souls around us who can guide us and give us that yaqeen of the akhirah. Imam al-Hussein represented, you look at the man, you can remember death. You can remember the otherworldly. You can suddenly see, I actually believe in God by seeing him. He did not need to say anything. And that was what happened with Khomeini. I mean, to a lesser, much lesser degree. When he died, they said the Imam has died. All his foes even cried. But, and again, this is not idolizing any individual or creating or promoting any ideology. It is just sometimes saying that spirituality, morals, ethics, vision, certainty, and traits which are commendable can be found even in our modern age. And you can change the tide, as again Iqbal says about Ibrahim, who rebelled against his family, he rebelled against his tribe, he rebelled against the religion, who called out to the sun. He says that Aaj bhi ho gar Ibrahim ka imam paida, aag kar sakti hai andaz gulistan paida. That even if today we had that muhkam, that iman, that yaqeen of Ibrahim, the pit of fire could become a beautiful meadow. And that's what we need to remember, because we live in a world where so much is going on, where we humans have wrought our own destruction by destroying the biodiversity in this world. How many species have become extinct? how many animals are becoming extinct, how we cage and kill animals, how we mass farm things, how we genetically modify crops, how we have thrown plastics beyond into the rivers. Oh, we have advanced so much. We have become so super advanced, but yet our bodies and our brains are still evolutionary under the hunter-gatherer stage. The evolutionary mismatching is still there. Our technology has become so fast, we're thinking in terms of technology, but we're not thinking about our moral agency. Has that advanced? And our bodies are still like hunter-gatherers, as scientists will tell you. Cutting-edge research will say evolution might have stopped even, or micro-evolution might be occurring, but it is definitely mismatched because of the diseases we are getting there. Our sedentary lives, and it is truly a woeful situation about, and of course we can only think about animal rights and ecology and everything when we have systems in the world that are strong enough to allow us to think about those things, not when we are just merely fighting each other over simple, silly things, or always in the pangs of our soul. And of course around the world, the Muslim world, the abject poverty around the world is a massive problem also. To hopefully, maybe we say that we need to begin with human beings, but it may be that what we have wrought on the earth, and the earth is repaying us for all the dhulm we have committed upon it, maybe. Anyhow, let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all to the true path of the Prophet and his family and the chosen individuals around them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all those around the world who are fighting this virus, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for anything we have committed and perpetuated in terms of, and that's why nature is repaying us this way. So we want to pray to Allah for all those who are sick and ill within our communities and families, and hopefully pray for the protection of everybody from this virus. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد المصطفى وعلى عمير المؤمن علي بن أبي طالب وعلى سيدة نساء العالمين فاطمة الزهراء وعلى سيدي شباب أهل الجنة الحسن المجتبى والحسين شهيد بأرض كربلاء وتسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين علي بن حسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد وحسن بن علي والحجة القائمة المهدي